The moment when silence spoke loudest. The gym smelled of sweat, leather, and determination. The walls echoed with the sound of punches against punching bags, the creaking of ring ropes and the low murmur of fighters in training. Among them, two men stood out, not just for their fame, but for their presence. Muhammad Ali, the king of boxing, with his wide smile and razor-sharp words, watched Bruce Lee with a curiosity he rarely showed. There was a man who mastered words, who turned interviews into spectacles and opponents into targets of his provocations. But there, in front of Bruce, something left him speechless. They found themselves in the center of the gym, surrounded by curious eyes. There, with his imposing stature, he crossed his arms and tilted his head, as if studying an enigma. "Bruce, how do you stay so sharp? Always so fast, so precise. I see you training, and it seems like you don't even blink. What's the secret?" Bruce Lee did not respond immediately. His eyes, dark and intense, fixed on Ali with a concentration that seemed to go through the champion's body. He took a deep breath, as if absorbing not only the question, but the weight of the presence before him. Then, without rushing, he brought his hand to his chin, his fingers slightly curved, as if he were holding an idea that had not yet taken shape. "Have you ever seen a tiger hunt?" asked Bruce, his voice calm, almost a whisper. Ali frowned in surprise. "I wasn't expecting a metaphor." "Of course. They're fast, strong." Bruce shook his head slowly. "It's not just that. Before the jump, before the attack, the tiger doesn't think. He doesn't calculate, he doesn't doubt. He is. His muscles don't tremble, his mind doesn't wander. He's whole in that instant. That's what you call sharp. It's not speed, it's not technique. It's the absence of hesitation." There he was silent. Bruce's words weren't an answer, but a mirror. He, who lived on provocations, mind games, calculated distractions, felt the weight of that truth. Bruce wasn't just talking about fighting. "I was talking about presence. You train your body, but you forget to train your mind not to tremble," Bruce continued, his eyes still fixed on Ali's. "When you step into the ring, how many voices do you hear? How many doubts? The public, the opponent, the fear of losing. All of this steals your strength. The tiger doesn't hear anything. He just acts." Ali opened his mouth to respond, but the words died before they came out. There was no provocation, there was no joke, there was no defense. Just the echo of that truth cutting deeper than any punch. He looked down for a second, as if he saw something in himself that he didn't recognize. Bruce smiled, not with arrogance, but with an almost compassionate understanding. "You're already the best at what you do, Muhammad. But imagine if, on top of everything, you were also whole." Ali said nothing. It didn't need to. The silence between them was answer enough. He held out his hand, and Bruce shook it, firm, speechless. When Ali turned to leave, his steps were lighter, as if something inside him had aligned. Years later, when Ali was asked about that encounter, he just smiled and said, "Bruce didn't teach me how to fight. He showed me what I already knew. The weight of wholeness." The ring was never the same after that day. Ali returned to training with a calmness that scared the coaches. There was no more shouting, no more taunting sparring partners, not even that defiant smile that made opponents tremble before the fight even started. Instead, there was a cold, almost mechanical precision, as if each movement was calculated not to impress but to exist in its purest state. Reporters noticed. Fans were surprised. Even his opponents, accustomed to deciphering his weaknesses between the lines of interviews, felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The first fight after meeting Bruce was against a young, hungry boxer who had spent weeks studying his videos, looking for loopholes. In the first round, the boy attacked with a fury that reminded him of Ali himself in his early years, that Ali who fought with his heart in his mouth, who exchanged punches as if each one were a declaration of war. But the champion didn't fight back. He dodged, let his opponent waste energy on blows that never found their target. In the second round, the young man was already panting, his arms were heavy. It was then that Ollie attacked. It wasn't a spectacular knockout. There was no single punch that knocked the opponent down like a chopped tree. It was a sequence, a precise jab, a cross that met the chin at just the right angle, a left hook that made the boy's body spin like a leaf in the wind before collapsing to the ground. The referee started counting, but the young man already knew. He got up before 10, staggering, and Ollie didn't pursue him. He just nodded, as if to say, "You tried. I understand." At the press conference, they asked if he had held back the blow on purpose. Ollie looked at the microphone as if it were a foreign object, something that didn't belong there. "I didn't hold anything back. I just didn't need more." The journalists insisted. They wanted a grand answer, one of those phrases that would go down in history. But Ollie just smiled, the same smile that Bruce had given him years before, not one of superiority, but of someone who finally understood something that had always been there. The last round. The fight against Foreman in Kinshasa was like nothing else. Ollie knew he couldn't beat him at his game. Foreman was a force of nature, a man who knocked down walls with punches, who made the ring shake beneath his steps. Then Ollie did what no one expected, he let himself be trapped. Against the ropes, he absorbed blows that would have knocked out any other fighter, while whispering to Foreman through his teeth. "Is that all you have? George, you hit like my grandmother." Foreman laughed, thinking it was teasing. But Ollie wasn't kidding. He was provoking, not the opponent's ego, but something deeper. Every punch Foreman threw was a piece of his own confidence being drained. By the 8th round, the giant was exhausted, his arms heavy as lead. That's when Ollie attacked. It wasn't a knockout. It was a liberation. A sequence of blows so clean, so precise, that it seemed like the air itself broke. Foreman fell like a bag of sand, and the entire world held its breath. Ollie didn't jump, he didn't scream. He just stood there, looking at the man on the ground, and for the first time in years, there was no triumph in his eyes. There was something closer to sadness. "I told you hit like my grandmother," he murmured, as the referee started counting. Foreman didn't listen. But Ollie knew that, somewhere inside the man, the words had found their target. The legacy. Years later, when Parkinson's had robbed him of his voice and movements, Ollie was still wanted. Reporters, fans, even former opponents were knocking on the door of his Michigan home, wanting to hear one last story, one last lesson. He received them with the same patience as always, his eyes shining behind the mask of illness. Once, a young boxer, full of tattoos and promises, asked what the secret was. Ollie took a while to respond. When he did, his voice was a hoarse whisper, but every word came through clearly. "The secret is not to have a secret. You already know how to fight. What you need is to stop fighting yourself." The boy frowned, confused. Ollie smiled. "Bruce told me that once. It took me years to understand." The young man nodded, as if he understood. But Ollie knew better. Understanding would come later, when he was alone in the ring, when the punches started to hurt, when doubt crept between rounds. Then, perhaps, he would remember that old champion who had once been the loudest in the world and, in the end, had discovered that silence was the greatest victory. And so, without fanfare, the story closed. Not with a knockout, but with a sigh, the sound of a man finally whole. The weight of silence. The gym smelled of old sweat and worn leather. The walls, covered in faded posters of old fights, seemed to whisper names that no one else remembered. There he watched the boy, Lucas, as he introduced himself, roll the bands around his hands with precise but shaky movements. There was something in his eyes, a shadow that wasn't just tiredness. It was fear. "You already know how to fight," Ollie repeated, more to himself than to the boy. But fighting isn't just about hitting the other person. It's about not letting the other person hit what you don't see. Lucas stopped, his bandages half rolled up, his fingers still. He looked at Ollie as if expecting a clearer explanation, a manual, a formula. But the old champion just crossed his arms, his body still agile despite the years, and waited. The first punch came without warning. Lucas attacked with the fury of someone who wanted to prove something, to Ollie, to the world, to himself. The blow grazed the old man's shoulder, and he didn't even move. Instead of counterattacking, Ollie just tilted his head, as if studying a riddle. "You're angry," he said, calmly. "But anger is bad fuel. It burns quickly and leaves ash." Lucas backed away, breathing hard. Sweat ran down his temple, mixing with frustration. "So what do I do?" he asked, his voice broken. Ollie smiled, but there was no joy in the gesture. It was the smile of someone who had seen that film before, of someone who knew how it ended. "You listen." And then, for the first time in years, Ollie did something he hadn't done since the days when the whole world called him the greatest. He took off his gloves. Lucas's eyes widened. What dash? No protection. No tricks. Just you, me, and what's left when the fight is over. The boy hesitated. Ollie was no longer the same man as in the black and white photos, but he still carried on his shoulders the weight of a title that no one would ever take from him. Even so, he extended his hands, bare, as an invitation. Lucas swallowed. And he attacked again. This time, Ollie moved. It didn't deviate. It didn't block. He just received the punch, letting the impact echo through his body like thunder. Lucas felt the air leave his lungs when his hand hit the old man's jaw, but Ollie didn't even stagger. He just shook his head, as if to say, "Is that all?" "You're holding it," Ollie said, voice steady despite the blow. "Holding your breath, holding your fear, holding even your own strength. Let go." Lucas tried again. And again. Each punch was stronger, more desperate. Each time, Ollie just absorbed it, as if the boy's body were made of wind and his, of stone. Until, in a moment, Lucas stopped. His hands fell to his sides, his shoulders hunched. He was exhausted. Defeated. "I can't do it," he murmured. Ollie approached. There was no triumph in his eyes, just an ancient sadness, as if he himself had said those words a million times. "Of course you can. You just don't know you're already doing it." And then, as if time had folded in on itself, Ollie saw himself in that boy, young Cassius Clay, full of fire and arrogance, breaking his hands against the world because he didn't know the world was already broken. He saw the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the titles lost and those regained. He saw Parkinson, slow and relentless, stealing his voice, his movement, his glory. He saw all of this reflected in Lucas's eyes, and knew that there was nothing to teach that the boy didn't already know. "The ring is not where you prove you're strong," Ollie said, touching Lucas's shoulder with a hand that was shaking slightly. "That's where you discover you never had to prove anything." Lucas closed his eyes. And, for the first time, he didn't feel the weight of his fists. He felt the ground beneath his feet. He felt the air coming in and out of his lungs. He felt himself, whole, without armor. When he opened his eyes, Ollie was already walking away, his gloves hanging off his shoulder, his step lighter. The gym remained the same, dirty, forgotten, full of ghosts. But something had changed. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was just the sound of a man finally learning not to fight what he already was. Lucas took a deep breath. And, for the first time in a long time, he smiled. The weight of silence. Lucas's smile didn't last long. Not because it had disappeared, but because, in that instant, he realized that smiling was just the beginning. The gym, with its peeling walls and the smell of old sweat, seemed smaller now, as if the shadows had receded a little. But the echoes were still there, the sound of his own muffled screams in past fights, the crack of opponents' bones he had broken without thinking, the murmur of voices that called him monster or promise. Ollie had already disappeared through the back door, leaving behind only the creaking of rusty hinges. Lucas looked at his hands. They didn't shake. They didn't hurt. They no longer carried the urgency to crush something. But they also didn't know what to do with that sudden calm. It was then that he heard the crying. Low, choked, coming from somewhere behind the dusty stands. Lucas frowned. It wasn't a sound he was used to hearing there, not from men, at least. Men in the gym cursed, growled, swore. But they cried in silence, if they cried at all. He walked around the ring ropes and followed the sound until he found a figure huddled between two piles of torn mats. He was a boy, he couldn't have been more than 15 years old, with his thin arms hugging his knees and his face buried in them. His back shook with sobs. Lucas hesitated. I didn't know how to deal with that. I never knew. In his own adolescence, pain was something that turned into anger, and anger into punches. But the boy in front of him didn't seem to want to fight. He seemed to want to disappear. Hey, Lucas said, his voice hoarse from disuse. The boy raised his head suddenly, his red eyes wide. Recognition flashed through them. Of course he recognizes me, Lucas thought. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the former fighter who was once called the next big thing before becoming just another face scarred by defeat. You're Lucas, the boy whispered, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Lucas Maudepedra. Lucas almost laughed. The nickname sounded ridiculous now, like a bad joke. Don't call me that, he said, crouching down in front of the boy. And you? What is your name? Raphael. Rafa. What happened, Rafa? The boy swallowed. My father, he said I'm no good. That I should have been born a girl, because at least a girl knows how to clean the house. The words came out choppy, as if each one hurt. He hit me again. He said if I cry, it will be worse. Lucas felt something twist inside him. It wasn't anger. It was something older, deeper. A memory of when he himself was little and heard the same words, only spoken by a coach who promised to make him a champion. You're weak. Crying is for sissies. If you want to be someone, swallow that shit and hit harder. He extended his hand, slowly, as if the boy were a frightened animal. Come with me. Rafa hesitated, but ended up accepting. Lucas led him to the gym's bathroom, a dirty cubicle with a cracked mirror above the sink. He turned on the tap and the water came out brown at first, then cleared. Wash your face, said Lucas. Rafa obeyed, splashing cold water on his swollen cheeks. When he looked in the mirror, he saw bruises starting to appear, one on his jaw, another near his temple. Lucas looked at the boy's reflection and, for a second, he saw himself at 14 years old, looking at his own injuries and thinking that that was the price of glory. Do you know what my coach told me? Lucas said, leaning against the wall. That I had to be tough. That if I felt pain, it was because I wasn't training properly. That if I cried, I was weak. He crossed his arms. I believed that for years. Until one day, I realized that he wasn't teaching me how to fight. It was teaching me to hate. Rafa looked at him, his eyes still moist, but now attentive. You're not weak because you're afraid, Lucas continued. You're no less of a man for crying. And if your father thinks that hitting you will make you stronger, he's more lost than I was. The boy lowered his head. But what do I do? I can't go home. Lucas took a deep breath. He knew what it was like, the desperation of having nowhere to go, the shame of admitting he needed help. But I also knew that sometimes the only thing stopping someone from falling was an outstretched hand. Stay here today, he finally said. Tomorrow we'll see what to do. Rafa didn't respond, but nodded. Lucas took him to the locker room, where there was a broken wooden bench and an old blanket that someone had left behind. It wasn't much, but it was a ceiling. A start. That night, Lucas didn't go home. He sat in the ring, watching Rafa sleep, wrapped in the blanket like a shield. The gym was silent, but it wasn't the same silence as before. Now there was something alive in him, the sound of breathing from a boy who no longer needed to hide, the creak of the floorboards beneath his own feet, the dull throb of a consciousness awakening after years of slumber. He thought about Ollie. What the old coach had said about not needing to prove anything. And for the first time, he truly understood. It wasn't about stopping fighting. It was about choosing what to fight for. The next morning, Lucas woke up to the sound of someone knocking on the gym door. Rafa was still asleep, so he got up slowly, feeling his muscles stiff. When he opened the door, he came face to face with a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, wearing a nurse's uniform. "Are you Lucas?" she asked, her voice firm but not hostile. "I am. My name is Clara. I'm a social worker. I received an anonymous tip about a missing boy. Rafael Santos." She looked over Lucas's shoulder, as if expecting to see the boy there. "Is he here?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "Okay." Clara sighed, relieved. "Thank God." His father reported him missing, but, she shook her head. "I know the family. It's not the first time this has happened." Rafa woke up to the sound of voices and appeared next to Lucas, his eyes still sleepy, but alert. When he saw Clara, his entire body stiffened. "Rafa," she said, crouching down to his level, "you don't need to be afraid. No one will force you to go home if you don't want to." The boy looked at Lucas, as if asking for permission. Lucas nodded. "I don't want to go back," Rafa murmured. Clara smiled, sadly. "So let's figure this out." The following days were a flurry of bureaucracy, phone calls, and meetings with judges. Lucas accompanied Rafa to all of them, even when it wasn't necessary. He didn't know why he did it, maybe because, for the first time, he felt like he was fixing something instead of just breaking it. Or maybe because, by helping the boy, he was, in some way, helping himself. On the third day, Clara appeared at the gym with news. Rafa would go to a temporary shelter until the situation with his family was resolved. It wasn't ideal, but it was a step. "Thank you," Rafa said to Lucas, before getting into Clara's car. "For not leaving me alone." Lucas ruffled the boy's hair. "Take care, okay?" Rafa smiled, a small but true smile, and got into the car. With the gym empty again, Lucas found himself faced with a choice. "I could go back to my old routine, training until I felt nothing, fighting for money in clandestine rinks, drowning my loneliness in bottles of cheap booze. Or I could do something different." He looked at the ring. Then to the gloves, still hanging on the hook where Ollie had left them. And, for the first time, he didn't see there a symbol of defeat, but a tool. The next day, Lucas returned to the gym with a roll of tape, a screwdriver, and a bucket of paint. He spent the morning fixing the ring ropes, sanding the floorboards, painting the peeling walls. In the afternoon, he hung a sign on the door. "Free boxing classes for young people. No prerequisites, just the will to learn." I didn't expect anyone to show up. But at the end of the week, 3 boys arrived, 2 skinny brothers who lived on the street and a shy teenager who had never thrown a punch in his life. Lucas taught them how to position themselves, how to breathe, how to hit without getting hurt. He didn't talk about strength. He talked about balance. About knowing when to back off. And, little by little, the gym stopped being a place of ghosts. It became a place of voices. A month later, Ollie returned. Lucas was in the ring, correcting a student's posture, when he heard the door creak. He looked up and saw the old trainer standing at the entrance, observing the scene with an expression that mixed surprise and something like pride. "So it's true," Ollie said, walking slowly to the ropes. "You became a teacher." Lucas shrugged. "I'm just passing on what you taught me." Ollie laughed, a hoarse, brief sound. "I didn't teach you any of that." "Not with words," Lucas replied. "But you showed me there was another way." Ollie looked around, the students training, the walls now clean, the ring repaired. Looks like you found yours. Lucas didn't say anything. It didn't need to. The gym, once a place of shadows, now breathed. And he finally knew what it was like to be at peace.